Hello, and welcome again to Taurus Software's video tutorial series on using Data Bridger with Salesforce. My name is Steve. I'll be walking through this exercise with you. In this exercise, we're going to continue on our discussion of virtual tables, our mechanism for connecting to data objects in Salesforce. In our last exercise, we walked through the process of creating a virtual table that we used to create account data in Salesforce. In this exercise, we're going to create a virtual table that will allow us to retrieve data from Salesforce. And in actuality, our approach is to actually select a group of records from Salesforce and deal with them as a group in our subsequent tutorial steps. So in this case, what we wish to do is to select a group of account records and to present to you just a quick picture of what it is that I'm referring to. In my Salesforce account, when I look at my accounts, I can see that there are a large number of accounts that were created, and many of these, or most of these, were created through prior exercises. In fact, through the exercise to create an account. And as I scroll through them, you can see here that we have names and addresses of accounts. And one of the pieces of information we're going to be using in our exercise is this field called account owner alias. So that is the alias ID, or the short name of the person or user who created those records. Our process to create records using our virtual table to create accounts logged in and created those accounts as the owner whose alias name was Dev. And you can see that we have all of those records here, and we have additional records that were not created by Dev but were created by another user. So when we go to create a virtual table that's going to query data, we actually have to provide a statement that is the query statement. Salesforce uses a query language called SOQL, which is Salesforce Object Query Language. It's very similar to SQL. And when I go through an exercise of selecting data and trying to figure out what my SOQL statement is going to be, I actually work in Salesforce itself to be able to make sure that I'm creating a SQL statement or SOQL statement that is legitimate, that collects the data I want to, and has no syntax errors. The place we do that in Salesforce is the developer console. So you can see I'm logged into my account, and if I go up to my settings button and choose developer console, I have a window that allows me to do development, to do execution of SOQL statements, and various other tasks as a developer for Salesforce. What we wish to do is go to our query editor window and issue a SQL statement or SOQL statement right here. My SOQL statement is going to say that I want to select the ID from Salesforce, the account number and name, billing, street address from account, the account object, and I'm going to specify where the owner alias is DEV, those records that we saw a moment ago. So I type in my SOQL statement and I click the execute button, and it provides me a list of records, records that meet the criteria I specified. If the query has a syntax error, it will tell me that as well, and I can work with it to correct and come up with a valid, suitable SOQL statement. And you can see that in this case, it has found all of those rows that I wanted. There was 104 of them. So I'm happy with this SOQL statement. So I'm going to close my developer window, my developer console window, and with that in mind, I'm going to revert back to Data Bridger Studio. We're going to create a new virtual table, and again, we do that by right-clicking and say Add Virtual Table. Remember that we specify whether it is for reading data or writing data. In this case, it's going to be for reading data, and then we specify which SOAP service or kind of request we're going to choose. In this case, we're going to choose a query. You'll notice that there's also query all and query more. We will be working with query, and we will eventually be working with query more. So the query, when I choose that, it provides to me my virtual table wizard window, and as before, we have both a request that we send to the cloud and a response that comes back from the cloud. In this case, when I go to specify the request that I want to send to the cloud, it's actually looking for a query string. That is the full query statement that I issued, and it requires double quotes around it, so I just paste in exactly the same SOQL statement that I had used before. Now, one of the options we have when we're issuing this kind of a request, a query request, is there's a checkbox here that says use data for layout. Well, this query requests 6 or 7 fields from the account object, and it's going to return those to me, and I'm going to have to decide how those get mapped into some other data target. If I choose use data for layout and then toggle to my response window, I can eventually see a set of data that meets that criteria, so that I will know what that data looks like and how I can map that data to a new location. So I'm going to expand my result, and I expect to receive a group of records, rows of data. And you can see that, first of all, before I even do anything else, there are options here or responses that include a done field, a query locator field, and a size field. We will get to those in a moment. First of all, if you look down the bottom of your screen, since those are the only 3 fields that are selected so far, we see that done says true, query locator is blank, and size is 104. That means when I decided to toggle back to my SOAP response, my Salesforce response from the cloud, it used that SOQL statement I had generated to query the database and get basic information, including whether there's any more data beyond this first request and how many rows there are in that request. So we know there's going to be 104 rows in this case. When we click on the rows button, it then expands our window to show the fields and the fields that it believes it retrieved, and it correctly retrieved all of the fields that I had specified, and it has checked each of those off. In other words, DataBridger is assuming that I want to retrieve those rows since I specified them, or those fields since I specified them in my SOQL request. It has now expanded my listing at the bottom of my screen to show me sample data. In fact, it shows me all those same 104 rows of data that I saw earlier in Salesforce, both in reviewing accounts and in issuing my SOQL statement. So this appears to be the right information that we want. A discussion about query locator will come up when we discuss or create another virtual table called query more. So we're going to do what we have to do here, which is to give this a name, and I'm going to say this is a query of the accounts. So I'm just going to call this query accounts, and I'm going to save and close this virtual table. And when I click on it, I can see that it has everything that I had requested, including those fields that actually are not data that I need, but data that tells me whether the query is done and how many rows are in the query. That is what is required to create a basic query request, in this case of account data. We'll be returning again with another video tutorial that goes through the process of querying more data, and that will come with a full explanation of why we even need to do that. The short statement is that Salesforce by default is going to only return a set of records with a maximum number of records, and the default is 2,000. So if we were requesting more than 2,000 records from Salesforce, then we would actually need to get the first 2,000 with a query, and anything beyond those 2,000 would be done with a query more. It would just say, give me more of what I previously asked for, and we would loop through that until we processed everything. So we'll discuss more details of that in our next video. Thank you for joining us again. This is Steve. We'll be continuing this series in another video. Thank you.